spent a lot of time trying to divide us.
I've never seen.
Coming from far away.
They serve an old power.
I need to.
All of existence. No protectors here. No lanterns.
Fighting the devil and his army. The time were fought us united.
What if the Justice League's darkest battle was only the beginning? Get ready for an epic breakdown of Zack Snyder's Justice League 2021, packed with powerful moments, hidden facts, and shocking details. Watch the full movie review and facts now on Revise Voila. Zack Snyder's Justice League is the 2021 director's cut and the original version of the 2017 American superhero movie Justice League. It is the fifth movie set in the DC Extended Universe, also known as the DCEU, and is based on the famous DC Comics superhero team, the Justice League. The movie represents director Zack Snyder's original vision for the film before he stepped away from the production. The story follows Batman, Ben Affleck, Gal Gadot, Cyborg, Ray Fisher, Aquaman, Jason Momoa. The Flash, Ezra Miller, Superman, Henry Cavill, and Martian Manhunter, Harry Lennox, as they come together to form a powerful team. Their mission is to stop Steppenwolf Sharon Hines, an evil new god from another dimension, and his army of parademons from taking over Earth. Steppenwolf is working for his powerful master, Darkseid, Ray Porter, who wants to conquer Earth and add it to his massive empire. The production of the original theatrical version of Justice League was extremely difficult, and the movie's script went through major changes several times. In May 2017, Zack Snyder stepped down from the project after the tragic death of his daughter Autumn. After that, Joss Whedon was brought in to finish the movie. Although he was not officially credited as the main director, Whedon directed additional scenes and made major changes to the movie. Whedon added many new scenes and gave the movie a brighter, more humorous, and lighter tone. He also cut down the movie's runtime significantly because Warner Brothers Pictures wanted the film to be shorter and easier for audiences to watch. As a result, the theatrical version was very different from Snyder's original vision. When the theatrical version of Justice League was released, it received a mixed reaction from critics and fans. The movie also did not perform as well at the box office as Warner Bros. Had hoped. Because of this, the studio decided to focus more on individual DC characters in future movies, instead of putting so much attention on one huge connected superhero universe. However, a huge number of fans continued asking for Zack Snyder's original version of the movie. Fans commonly called it the Snyder Cut. For years, people campaigned online and across social media demanding that Warner Bros. Release Snyder's original cut. Many fans believed that Snyder's version would be much closer to the story and tone he originally planned. At first, most people in the movie industry believed that the Snyder Cut would probably never be released. But the fan movement continued to grow, and Warner Bros. Eventually decide to move forward with the project. In February 2020, the studio officially began working toward completing Snyder's version. In May 2020, Zack Snyder announced that his version would officially be released as Zack Snyder's Justice League on HBO Max. The studio spent around $70 million to finish the movie's visual effects, music, editing, and other unfinished work. New scenes were also filmed in October 2020 to complete Snyder's version and bring his original vision to life. The movie was dedicated to the memory of Snyder's daughter, Autumn, whose death had been one of the reasons he originally left the production. Her memory became an important part of the project and its emotional meaning for Snyder and many of the fans who supported the release of his version. Zack Snyder's Justice League was finally released on HBO Max in the United States on March 18, 2021. Unlike the original theatrical version, this cut was much longer and gave the characters, storylines, and villains far more screen time. The movie quickly became one of the biggest releases on the platform and ended up becoming the fourth most streamed movie on HBO Max that year. The Snyder Cut also received much more positive reactions from critics and audiences. Many critics felt that Snyder's version was a major improvement over the theatrical cut because it had a clearer story, stronger character development, a more serious tone, and a much closer connection to Snyder's original plans for the DC universe. However, the movie's extremely long runtime was one of the biggest complaints. At around 4 hours, Zack Snyder's Justice League is much longer than the original theatrical version. Overall, the Snyder Cut became a rare example of fans successfully pushing a major Hollywood studio to release a completely different version of a movie. It gave Zack Snyder the chance to finally present the Justice League story closer to the way he originally imagined it. The film opens right after Superman, Henry Cavill, and Doomsday kill each other. Superman's final scream spreads across the entire world, and the sound somehow awakens the power inside the three mother boxes hidden in different places. The one kept by the Amazons in Themyscira, the one protected by the Atlanteans, and the one hidden by humans. The Amazons suddenly see their mother box crack open, and they immediately rush to warn Queen Hippolyta, Connie Nielsen. Bruce Wayne, Ben Affleck, rides a horse through the cold lands of Iceland until he reaches a small village. He is there looking for Aquaman, Jason Momoa. Bruce walks into a local tavern and finds the man himself, Arthur Curry, sitting inside. The villagers think Bruce is making fun of them when he starts talking about a mysterious man from the sea who visits their village. Bruce then shows Arthur that he has plenty of money, and the two step outside to talk privately. Bruce explains that he is putting together a team because Superman is dead and he wants Arthur to join them. But Arthur has absolutely no interest in becoming part of Bruce's team. He turns him down and heads back into the ocean while the local women sing a traditional Icelandic song. Bruce eventually returns home and tells Alfred Jeremy Irons that Aquaman rejected his offer. Meanwhile, in Smallville, Martha Kent, Diane Lane, is forced to leave her old home with her dog, Dusty, because the house has been foreclosed. She has lost the place she once shared with Clark over in Metropolis. Lois Lane, Amy Adams, is still completely heartbroken over Clark's death. She visits the Superman Memorial every single day, unable to let go of the man she loved. London in London, a group of terrorists storms a museum and kills the security guards before taking several people hostage. The terrorists plan to set off a bomb powerful enough to destroy four city blocks. As they prepare to start the countdown, Diana Prince, also known as Wonder Woman, Gal Gadot, is watching from the roof of a nearby building. Wonder Woman jumps into action and takes on the terrorists by herself. She quickly beats down several of them. But then the leader points his weapon at the hostages. Diana immediately steps in front of the bullets and blocks them with her powerful gauntlets. She then uses her gauntlets to destroy the terrorist leader and stop the attack. After everything is over, Diana stays behind to comfort the frightened children who were caught in the middle of the situation. Themyscira, on the island of Themyscira, Queen Hippolyta joins the Amazons inside the ancient temple where their mother box has been protected for thousands of years. After a moment, the mother box seems to lose its power and shut down. But then something terrifying happens. A huge portal suddenly opens, and Steppenwolf, Sharon Hines, arrives with an army of parademons. They attack the Amazons and immediately go after the mother box. The Amazons fight back with everything they have. Hippolyta manages to grab the mother box and runs from the temple while the other Amazons sacrifice themselves. They bring the temple crashing down over the parademons in an attempt to stop them. Hippolyta barely has time to mourn her fallen sisters because Steppenwolf and his parademons come flying after her. She jumps onto a horse and tries to escape with the mother box. Steppenwolf chases her across the fields, killing several more Amazons who try to stand in his way. Eventually, he attacks Hippolyta and another Amazon, knocking them off their horses. Steppenwolf takes the mother box and mocks Hippolyta before leaving with his army. After watching her people suffer, Hippolyta orders her general to light the ancient fire inside the temple. The fire is meant to send a warning to Diana and let her know that something terrible has happened. At Star Labs, a parademon enters the facility while searching for one of the mother boxes. It can sense the box nearby and becomes extremely aggressive. It even attacks a janitor who accidentally sees it. Meanwhile, Victor Stone, also known as Cyborg, Ray Fisher, secretly keeps an eye on the mother box inside his closet. Victor still has a lot of anger toward his father, Silas Stone, Joe Morton. He blames Silas for using the mother box to save his life and turning him into the powerful but heavily mechanical being he is today. Elsewhere, Diana sees the ancient fire that was lit by her mother. She travels to the temple to investigate what happened. There, she discovers an arrow sent by Hippolyta. Diana goes underground and finds ancient drawings showing the mother boxes. She also discovers drawings and information about a terrifying being known as Darkseid, Ray Porter. Meanwhile, Arthur Curry saves a sailor from a dangerous storm. After rescuing the man, Arthur returns to the ocean and travels toward Atlantis. There, he meets Nuidis Volko, Willem Dafoe. Volko reminds Arthur that he has responsibilities toward Atlantis, but he also warns him that a dangerous enemy is searching for the mother box protected by the Atlanteans. Back at his base, Steppenwolf contacts Darkseid's servant, Desard, Peter Guinness. Steppenwolf tells Desard that he has successfully recovered the first mother box. Instead of congratulating him, Desard insults Steppenwolf for leaving their home planet and going on what he considers a pointless mission. He reminds Steppenwolf that he should be serving Darkseid instead. Diana then goes to Bruce Wayne's home. She explains everything she has discovered about the mother boxes and warns Bruce about why Darkseid and his forces want them. She tells him about a terrifying plan called the Unity. If the three mother boxes are brought together, they can transform an entire planet and turn it into a world similar to Darkseid's home planet, Apocalypse. Diana also explains how Darkseid created the parademons. He used loyal followers and stripped away their humanity, turning them into terrifying creatures that would obey his commands. Centuries earlier, Darkseid and his parademon army came to Earth and fought against an alliance made up of the Amazons, Atlanteans, Green Lanterns, and the ancient gods. The gods were led by powerful beings such as Zeus, Sergi Constance, and Ares, David Thewlis. A massive and bloody battle broke out between the two sides. During the battle, Zeus and Ares managed to seriously injure Darkseid. The attack forced Darkseid and his parademon army to retreat from Earth. After Darkseid left, the three mother boxes were separated. The Amazons took one, the Atlanteans protected another, and the third box was hidden by humanity. Diana makes it clear to Bruce that they cannot waste any time. If they want to stop Steppenwolf and Darkseid, they have to find the mother boxes before the enemy does. In Central City, Barry Allen Ezra Miller goes to a job interview at a dog walking business. While walking around the area, he accidentally runs into Iris West Kiersey Clemens and immediately becomes interested in her. Outside, a truck driver gets distracted after dropping his burger inside the vehicle. He tries to pick it up while still driving and completely loses control of the truck. The truck crashes into a hot dog stand, and Iris is caught in the middle of the accident. Barry instantly uses his super speed powers as the Flash. He races outside, moves faster than anyone can see, and saves Iris from getting seriously hurt. While doing it, he even manages to grab a hot dog for himself. Later, Barry visits his father, Henry Allen, Billy Crudup, who is serving a life sentence in prison for the murder of Barry's mother, Nora Allen. The problem is, Henry didn't actually kill her. Barry has always believed his father is innocent, but he has never been able to prove it. Henry is disappointed to see Barry struggling through one dead end job after another, instead of using his intelligence and abilities to build a better future. Meanwhile, Steppenwolf and his parademons attack several Atlantean warriors. Steppenwolf uses a strange device on one of the Atlanteans to pull information directly from his mind. The device projects images from the Atlantean warrior's thoughts, revealing the location of the second mother box. Back on the surface, Diana and Bruce go through files and information about Arthur, Barry, and Victor as they continue building their team. The story then shows Victor's life before he became Cyborg. Victor was a talented high school football player and had a complicated relationship with his father, Silas. However, he was extremely close to his mother, Eleanor Stone, Karen Bryson. One day, after a football game, Victor and his mother were driving home when they got into a horrible car accident. The crash killed Eleanor and left Victor in terrible condition. He lost most of his limbs and also lost vision in his left eye. Silas refused to let his son die. He used the power of the mother box that was being kept inside Star Labs to save Victor's life. The technology completely transformed Victor's body and turned him into cyborg. The transformation gave Victor incredible strength, advanced abilities, and access to an almost unlimited amount of information. He can also connect with and control technology in ways that normal humans never could. Later, Cyborg is seen secretly using his abilities to help people. He transfers money into the bank account of a struggling single mother, but he keeps his face hidden because he doesn't want anyone to know who he really is. Barry eventually returns home and finds Bruce Wayne waiting for him. Bruce already knows Barry's secret identity. To prove that he knows Barry is the Flash, Bruce throws a batarang at him, knowing Barry will be fast enough to catch it. Barry realizes that Bruce knows the truth and quickly understands what Bruce wants. It doesn't take much convincing for Barry to agree to join Bruce's team. While working on Bruce's computer, Diana receives a message from Cyborg asking her to meet him. Diana meets Victor and asks him to join them. But Victor still isn't ready to become a superhero or work with anyone else. Instead, he visits the cemetery where his mother is buried and where his own name has been placed on a grave. He then takes the mother box and buries it in the cemetery. Meanwhile, Silas learns from his colleague Ryan Jung, that the strange sample they recovered from Superman's ship becomes extremely hot when they hit it with an electron laser. Silas returns home only to discover that Victor has completely destroyed parts of the place in anger. Before Silas can figure out what is happening, a parademon attacks and kidnaps him. In Gotham City, Commissioner Jim Gordon, JK. Simmons learns that several people have been kidnapped by parademons. The creatures are questioning the prisoners because they want information about the locations of the mother boxes. Gordon activates the bat signal to call Batman. At the same time, Batman arrives with Diana and Barry. Steppenwolf and his parademons then attack Atlantis in search of the second mother box. Princess Mera, Amber Heard, and the Atlantean warriors try to protect the box. But Steppenwolf and his army are too powerful. They overpower the Atlanteans and take the mother box. Just as Steppenwolf is about to kill Mera, Aquaman suddenly arrives and saves her. Steppenwolf escapes with the box. Afterward, Mera tries to talk to Arthur about his mother, Atlana, but Arthur becomes angry and bitter when he hears her name. Arthur believes his mother abandoned him and his father, so he refuses to talk about her. Steppenwolf takes the second mother box back to his base and creates a massive red energy dome around it. Batman arrives with Wonder Woman and the Flash to meet Commissioner Gordon. Shortly afterward, Cyborg joins them after seeing the bat signal. Gordon explains that the parademons have been kidnapping people and searching for information about the mother boxes. Cyborg studies the information and discovers that the prisoners are being held at Strikers Island inside an underground facility beneath Gotham City Harbor. The heroes head there together. Inside the facility, they find Steppenwolf and his parademons holding the prisoners. Steppenwolf is interrogating Silas Stone, trying to force him to reveal information about the mother box. Victor suddenly appears and attacks the parademons to save his father Batman, Wonder Woman, and the Flash jump into the fight as well. The heroes battle Steppenwolf's army while trying to free the kidnapped prisoners. After the prisoners are released, the underground facility begins flooding with water. The heroes are trapped, but Aquaman suddenly arrives. He uses his strength and abilities to hold the water back long enough for everyone else to escape safely. Cyborg then flies away and returns with the final mother box. Meanwhile, Steppenwolf arrives at a strange piece of land. He slams his weapon into the ground, causing a huge symbol to appear. The symbol is connected to the anti life equation, a powerful force that Darkseid wants to use to control all living beings. Steppenwolf contacts Darkseid and tells him about what he has discovered. Darkseid becomes interested in the anti life equation because he wants to use its power to control the population of Earth. Later, the heroes gather at Bruce Wayne's home. Cyborg explains the history of the mother box that was kept at Star Labs. The Nazis originally discovered the box after World War II. It was later kept by the Pentagon for around 70 years. Eventually, it was taken out when scientists wanted to study the remains of Superman's ship. Silas eventually gained access to the mother box and used its power to save Victor's life after the car accident. That experiment transformed Victor into Cyborg. The heroes now realize just how powerful the mother boxes really are. They come up with a risky plan. Use the final mother box to bring Superman back to life. They know the plan could go horribly wrong, but they also believe Superman may be the only person powerful enough to help them defeat Steppenwolf and eventually stand against Darkseid. Meanwhile, Martha Kent visits Lois Lane at her apartment. Lois is still struggling to deal with Clark's death and hasn't been able to move forward with her life. Martha encourages Lois to keep living and not let grief completely consume her. After Martha leaves, however, something unexpected is revealed. The woman who visited Lois wasn't actually Martha. She was Martian Manhunter Harry Lennox in disguise. After leaving Lois, he returns to his normal human identity as General Swanwick, secretly watching over Earth while hiding his true identity. Casting Ben Affleck as Bruce Wayne. Batman Ben Affleck's casting as Batman represented one of the most high profile and initially controversial decisions in the modern superhero era, announced in 2013 for Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. Affleck stepped into a role previously defined for a generation by Christian Bale under Christopher Nolan. Affleck brought a different physicality and life experience. At the time of casting, he was in his early 40s, older than most previous cinematic Batmans at the start of their runs, which aligned with Zack Snyder's vision of a weary, battle hardened Bruce Wayne who had already spent years fighting crime in Gotham and was beginning to feel the cumulative cost. Affleck's background as both a major movie star and an Oscar winning screenwriter and director, Good Will Hunting, Argo, gave him a unique position within the production. He was not merely an actor for hire, he was an executive producer on Zack Snyder's Justice League and had been deeply involved in the development of the larger DCEU plans that included a standalone Batman film he was set to write and direct. That level of creative investment shaped how the character was portrayed. Affleck's Batman is a tactical leader, a strategist who recruits the other heroes rather than a lone vigilante operating in isolation. The physical transformation required for the role was significant. Affleck underwent intensive training to achieve the broader, more imposing silhouette. Snyder preferred, distinct from the leaner, more armored look of the Nolan films. In the Snyder Cut specifically, Affleck's performance benefits from restored footage and additional photography completed in 2020. Scenes that expand Batman's interactions with the League, his relationship with Alfred, and the nightmare epilogue sequences give the character more emotional texture. The decision to bring Affleck back for those new shoots, including the sequence opposite Jared Leto's Joker, underscored how central his interpretation remained to Snyder's intended arc. Affleck's Batman is less quippy than some comic iterations and more haunted. A man carrying the weight of Superman's death and the knowledge of larger cosmic threats. That tone was a deliberate casting and directional choice that set the entire ensemble's emotional register. Henry Cavill as Clark Kent, Superman. Kal-El Henry Cavill's casting as Superman originated with Man of Steel in 2013 and carried through Batman v Superman into Justice League. Cavill was selected after an extensive search that considered numerous actors. Snyder and the producers sought someone who could embody both the mythic scale of the character and a contemporary sense of isolation. Cavill's height, classical features, and prior work in projects that required physical presence made him a natural fit for the Kryptonian ideal. What distinguished Cavill's casting within the Snyder framework was the deliberate choice to explore Superman as a figure of both hope and alienation. In the Snyder Cut, Superman's resurrection and subsequent role are given substantially more screen time and emotional weight than in the 2017 theatrical version. Cavill's performance in the restored material emphasizes the character's innate goodness without undercutting the godlike power. The actor's commitment to the physical demands, particularly the reshoots that required him to regain the Superman physique after a period of different training for other projects, demonstrated the priority placed on continuity of the character's visual identity. Cavill's Superman functions as the moral and power center of the League once restored. The casting decision to keep him as the inspirational figure around whom the team coalesces was foundational to Snyder's structure. Supporting performances, including Amy Adams as Lois Lane and Diane Lane as Martha Kent, were calibrated to ground Cavill's larger than life presence in human relationships. The combination created a Superman who feels both otherworldly and emotionally accessible, a balance that required careful casting chemistry across multiple films. Gal Gadot as Diana Prince Wonder Woman. Gal Gadot's casting as Wonder Woman remains one of the most successful and defining decisions of the entire DCEU. Discovered relatively late in the process for Batman v Superman, Gadot auditioned in a scene opposite Ben Affleck that reportedly left the creative team, and Affleck himself immediately convinced. Snyder has recounted that the chemistry and authority she brought to the reading effectively ended the search. At the time, Gadot was best known for supporting roles in the Fast and Furious franchise and had limited leading lady experience in major Hollywood productions. Her background as a former Israeli Defense Forces combat instructor and her statuesque physical presence aligned with the Amazonian ideal Snyder envisioned. Gadot's Wonder Woman is regal, compassionate, and lethal. The casting choice leaned into authenticity of accent and bearing rather than forcing an Americanized interpretation. In Zack Snyder's Justice League, her role expands considerably beyond the theatrical cut. Restore sequences on Themyscira, additional interactions with the League, and the deeper exploration of her history with the gods and Ares give the character greater agency and mythological weight. The decision to surround Gadot with the supporting ensemble of Amazon actresses, Connie Nielsen as Hippolyta, Robin Wright as Antiope, in flashbacks, Lisa Loven Kongsley as Menalip, Anne Ogbomo as Philippus, and others, created a cohesive cultural and physical world. The casting of these women emphasized strengths, diversity of appearance, and martial credibility rather than conventional Hollywood glamour alone. Gadot's chemistry with the male leads, particularly Affleck and later Cavill, was a significant factor in the ensemble's cohesion. Her ability to hold the screen against the more established stars validated the risk of casting a relatively unproven lead in such an iconic role. The subsequent success of Wonder Woman 2017 retrospectively confirmed the correctness of the original casting decision and elevated her status within the larger franchise. Jason Momoa as Arthur Curry, Aquaman. Jason Momoa's casting as Aquaman marked a deliberate departure from the traditional blonde, clean cut interpretation of the character that had dominated earlier media. Announced in 2014, Momoa brought Polynesian heritage, an imposing physical frame, and a rugged, almost barbaric energy that reframed Aquaman as a reluctant outsider king rather than a polished undersea monarch. Snyder embraced Momoa's existing tattoos and long hair, incorporating them into the character design instead of covering or altering them. This choice grounded the character in a specific cultural texture and visual distinctiveness. Momoa's performance style, charismatic, humorous, and physically dominant, provided necessary contrast within the darker ensemble. In the Snyder Cut, Aquaman's introduction and recruitment scenes are given more space, allowing Momoa to establish the character's isolation and eventual commitment to the surface world. Supporting casting around him, including Amber Heard as Mera and Willem Dafoe as Nuidis Vulko, reinforced the Atlantean world. Heard's Mera is positioned as both romantic interest and political equal, while Dafoe's Vulko serves as a mentor figure bridging the surface and underwater cultures. The decision to cast Momoa against type relative to comic book iconography proved commercially and culturally significant. It broadened the visual language of DC's heroes and contributed to the later success of the standalone Aquaman film. Within Zack Snyder's Justice League, Momoa's presence adds kinetic energy and a different moral perspective, someone who has lived apart from humanity's conflicts and must choose to engage. Ezra Miller as Barry Allen, the Flash Ezra Miller's casting as the Flash introduced a younger, more neurotic and emotionally volatile energy into the league. Selected after chemistry reads and screen tests, Miller brought an idiosyncratic physicality and rapid fire delivery that suited Snyder's interpretation of a character still discovering the extent of his powers. Miller's background in independent and prestige films. We need to talk about Kevin. The perks of being a wallflower suggested an ability to handle the more dramatic and traumatic elements of Barry Allen's backstory, particularly the incarceration of his father and the murder of his mother. In the Snyder Cut, the Flash receives expanded material that explores his powers, his relationship with his father, Billy Crudup in a brief but pivotal appearance, and his role as the team's heart and comic relief without reducing him to pure comic relief. The casting of Kiersey Clemens as Iris West, though limited in the final film, was intended to plant seeds for future development. Miller's performance balances vulnerability with growing confidence, a trajectory that required an actor comfortable with both physical comedy and emotional exposure. The decision to cast a non traditional leading man type in the role of the Flash contributed to the ensemble's overall diversity of energy and age. Miller's Barry feels like the youngest member, not only chronologically but temperamentally, which creates productive friction and mentorship dynamics with Batman and Wonder Woman. Ray Fisher as Victor Stone, Cyborg. Ray Fisher's casting as Cyborg was announced in 2014 and represented a major expansion of the character's importance relative to many earlier Justice League adaptations. In the comics, particularly post New 52, Cyborg had become a founding member. Snyder elevated him further, making Victor Stone's origin and internal conflict central to the film's emotional spine. Fisher, a stage trained actor with limited major film credits at the time, was chosen for his ability to convey both the human cost of Victor's transformation and the emerging power of the cybernetic being. The role demanded extensive motion capture work and a performance that could carry philosophical weight about identity, autonomy, and humanity. In Zack Snyder's Justice League, Cyborg's storyline is substantially restored and expanded compared with the 2017 theatrical cut. Scenes exploring his relationship with his father Silas, Joe Morton, his mother Eleanor, Karen Bryson, and his own evolving understanding of the mother boxes give a Fisher material to portray a character torn between machine efficiency and human emotion. The casting of Morton, a veteran actor with gravitas, as Silas provided a strong dramatic foil and grounded the more fantastical elements of Cyborg's origin in recognizable parental conflict. Fisher's performance has been widely regarded as one of the primary beneficiaries of the Snyder Cut's restoration. The additional footage allows the character to move from reluctant participant to essential league member whose unique abilities prove decisive. The decision to center a black actor in one of the most significant heroic roles in the film also contributed to the ensemble's representational breadth alongside Jason Momoa and the diverse Amazon cast. Supporting and antagonist casting. The supporting cast was assembled with equal attention to both star power and specific dramatic function. Amy Adams returned as Lois Lane, providing continuity and an emotional anchor for Superman's resurrection arc. Jeremy Irons continued as Alfred Pennyworth, bringing dry wit and paternal concern that humanized Batman's more isolated moments. Diane Lane's Martha Kent offered maternal warmth and moral clarity. J.K. Simmons joined as Commissioner Gordon, adding institutional weight to the Gotham sequences and linking the street level world to the cosmic threat. On the antagonistic side, Ciaran Hinds was cast as Steppenwolf, performing the role through motion capture and voice. Hinds brought a weary, almost tragic quality to the character, portraying him as a fallen general seeking redemption through conquest rather than a one dimensional invader. The expansion of the New Gods mythology in the Snyder Cut introduced Ray Porter as Darkseid and Peter Guinness as Desard. Porter's deep, resonant voice and motion capture performance established Darkseid as the true overarching threat, a casting choice that paid off the long teased presence of the character. The decision to use experienced voice and character actors for these largely digital roles prioritized vocal authority and physical performance over pure star casting. Additional notable castings included Jared Leto's return as the Joker for the Nightmare epilogue sequences, Joe Manganiello as Deathstroke in a brief but visually striking appearance, Harry Lennox expanding his role from General Swanwick into Martian Manhunter, and a range of Amazon and Atlantean supporting players who populated the mythological flashbacks. Even smaller roles, such as Russell Crowe's voice cameo as Jor-El and Carla Gugino's voice work, were handled by established performers who added texture without disrupting the central ensemble. Casting philosophy and ensemble dynamic. Zack Snyder's approach to casting, Justice League emphasized physical presence, prior franchise continuity, and the ability to inhabit archetypal roles while still delivering specific emotional colors. The core six, Affleck, Cavill, Gadot, Momoa, Miller, and Fisher, were selected and developed across multiple films, so that by the time of Justice League, they already carried shared history. This long lead casting strategy allowed the film to function as a true team up rather than an origin story for the entire group. The ensemble was deliberately varied in age, ethnicity, body type, and performance style. Affleck's weathered intensity, Cavill's classical heroism, Gadot's regal composure, Momoa's raw physicality, Miller's restless energy, and Fisher's internal conflict created a spectrum of heroic modes. Supporting players were chosen to either deepen those modes, Irons with Affleck, Adams and Lane with Cavill, Morton with Fisher, or to expand the mythological canvas, the Amazon and Atlantean casts, the New Gods performers. Reshoots and additional photography in 2020 further refined certain performances. Affleck, Gadot, Fisher, and others returned to complete or expand scenes, demonstrating the actors' continued investment in Snyder's version of the material. The final casting tapestry of Zack Snyder's Justice League reflects a consistent directorial vision. Larger than life figures, rendered with enough human detail and interpersonal texture to sustain a 4-hour narrative. Every major role was filled with an eye toward both immediate dramatic function and the longer arc Snyder originally planned for the DCEU. The result is an ensemble whose individual strengths and collective chemistry remain one of the defining features of the film. Production development and pre production. The roots of Zack Snyder's Justice League trace back to the release of Man of Steel in 2013, when director Zack Snyder laid out a broader plan for what would become the DC Extended Universe. His vision was structured as a 5-film arc, beginning with Man of Steel, continuing through Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice in 2016, and culminating in a planned trilogy of Justice League films. From the outset, Snyder wanted Batman v Superman to represent the darkest chapter of the saga, with each subsequent installment gradually shifting toward a lighter tone as the story progressed and the team of heroes came together. That plan ran into trouble almost immediately. Batman v Superman was released to a poor critical reception, with reviewers singling out its heavy, somber atmosphere, sluggish pacing, and near total absence of humor as major weaknesses. The backlash was significant enough that it forced both Warner Brothers Pictures and Snyder himself to reconsider the direction of the films that were still to come. This was a particularly tense moment for the studio because two major productions were already deep into their production cycles. Suicide Squad, which had already finished principal photography, and Justice League, which was barely a month away from the start of filming. Rather than scrap or dramatically delay either project, the studio opted to make adjustments on the fly. For Justice League specifically, Snyder and his screenwriter, Chris Terrio, went back into the script and reworked its tone in an effort to soften some of the criticisms that had been leveled at Batman v Superman. This shift in direction extended beyond the writing and into the visual language of the film. Cinematographer Fabian Wagner later explained that Snyder wanted to move away from the heavily stylized, desaturated, high contrast cinematography that had defined the earlier films in the franchise. The intention was to give Justice League a brighter, more visually inviting look that would feel distinct from the moodier aesthetic of Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, while still retaining Snyder's directorial fingerprint. Principal photography on Justice League began in April 2016 and continued through to December of that year. In the months that followed the wrap of filming, Snyder assembled and screened several different cuts of the film for Warner Bros. Executives as well as for friends and family. Eventually, a version of the film reached a final runtime and picture lock, though it's worth noting that this cut was not truly finished in a technical sense. The visual effects work remained incomplete in numerous shots, and the audio mix had only been partially completed. Snyder has since described these cuts as essentially finished from a storytelling standpoint, needing only minor computer generated tweaks before the film could be considered complete. Outside assessments of how close the film actually was to completion varied. A contributor to Forbes, who also worked as a screenwriter, estimated that Snyder's cut was more than 90% finished at the point of his departure. A separate estimate, cited by the Daily Telegraph and attributed to a visual effects expert, suggested that Warner Bros. Would have needed to invest somewhere in the range of an additional $30 to $40 million to bring the film to full completion. Snyder had begun showing rough versions of his cut to studio executives as early as the final week of February 2017, but the response from those executives was unfavorable. They felt the narrative was overly complicated and began pushing for a different creative direction. Dissatisfied with the direction Snyder had taken the film, Warner Bros. Brought in Joss Whedon, the director behind two of the biggest entries in the rival Marvel Cinematic Universe, The Avengers and Avengers, Age of Ultron. Whedon was tasked with rewriting portions of the script and overseeing an extensive round of reshoots. Around this same period, then Warner Bros. CEO Kevin Sujihara set a hard mandate that the finished film could not run longer than 2 hours. Part of the studio's reluctance to simply delay the release stemmed from broader corporate anxieties. There were concerns at the time that AT&T, which was in the process of acquiring the studio's parent company, might restructure or dissolve elements of the business, concerns that, in a twist of corporate history, would eventually prove at least partially prescient when a different merger reorganized Warner Media in 2022. Initially, the plan was for Snyder himself to direct the additional scenes that Whedon had written, and the two filmmakers were collaborating to meet the studio's demands. That arrangement was upended by tragedy. In March 2017, Snyder's daughter, Autumn Snyder, died. While Snyder had originally been receptive to the idea of Whedon contributing new material to the script, his attitude shifted as Warner Brothers began handing Whedon greater creative control and more directing authority over the production. Despite his growing unease with how much influence Whedon was being given, Snyder chose not to push back forcefully as he and his family were consumed by grief in the wake of Autumn's death. By May 2017, Snyder had formally stepped away from the production. His wife and producing partner, Deborah Snyder, departed the project shortly afterward. A report that surfaced roughly a year later, in February 2018, claimed that the studio had actually quietly dismissed Snyder from the project around 3 months before his departure was ever publicly announced. Once Snyder was out, Whedon took over full creative control of the production, although Snyder's name remained attached as director in the credits. The scope of Whedon's rewrite was substantial. He is reported to have added close to 80 additional pages to the screenplay. Fabian Wagner, the film's cinematographer, has estimated that only about 10% of the footage that ultimately made up Whedon's theatrical cut actually came from material Snyder had originally shot. The musical side of the production went through its own upheaval during this period. Composer Tom Holkenborg professionally known as Junkie XL, had already finished a complete score for the film under Snyder's direction. Partway through post production, however, he was replaced by Danny Elfman, who composed a new score to accompany Whedon's reworked version of the story. The new material that Whedon wrote and filmed carried a noticeably different tone from what Snyder had shot, brighter, laced with more comedic beats, and toned down in terms of on screen violence compared to Snyder's original, darker approach. To bring the runtime in line with the studio's 2 hour mandate, more than 90 minutes of footage that Snyder had originally shot was cut from the film, although the broader plot structure and outline of the story remained intact. Test screenings reflected the turbulence of the production. The earliest assemblies scored poorly with test audiences, but once Whedon's version was further refined, it eventually tested as well as Wonder Woman, DC's other major 2017 release, which convinced Warner Brothers to move forward with Whedon's cut as the theatrical release. Notably, a Warner Brothers executive who spoke anonymously in February 2021 later revealed that even people inside the studio were unhappy with what they considered bewildering changes in Whedon's version, but the prevailing internal culture discouraged voicing that criticism, so the studio proceeded regardless. Justice League opened in theaters on November 17, 2017. Critics quickly zeroed in on the film's disjointed nature, frequently describing it using the term Frankenstein to capture the sense that two directors with fundamentally different creative visions had been stitched together into a single uneven final product. After Whedon's cut had its first screenings in late 2017, both Deborah Snyder and executive producer Christopher Nolan urged Zack Snyder not to watch the finished film, believing it would be too painful for him given everything the family had been through. Commercially, Justice League grossed roughly $657.9 million worldwide against a production budget estimated at around $300 million. When measured against a break even point that some analysts placed as high as $750 million, once marketing and distribution costs were factored in, Deadline Hollywood estimated that the film actually resulted in a net loss of approximately $60 million for Warner Bros. That underperformance had lasting consequences for the DCEU as a whole, prompting the studio to abandon its earlier ambitions of a tightly interconnected shared universe in favor of standalone films built around individual characters. Even after he had officially left the project, Snyder held on to a rough assembly of his version of the film, saved on a hard drive. At the time, that cut had not gone through any formal post production process. He described keeping it as something of a personal memento, a way to show it to people privately, or potentially to use small excerpts of it in a documentary, because he genuinely believed his version of the film would never see an official release. At one point, Snyder sent an editor to retrieve additional footage related materials on a hard drive from the studio. When he was subsequently asked to return the materials on the grounds that they were studio property, he declined, characterizing his retention of the footage as being for his own personal use. Studio security was reportedly informed of the situation, but no formal action was taken against him, since nobody at the studio anticipated that Snyder would go on to actively work on assembling an alternate cut of the film using that material. Almost immediately following the theatrical release of Justice League, a grassroots fan movement began pushing for the release of what came to be known as the Snyder Cut. An early online petition calling for its release gathered more than 100,000 signatures. This campaign, which rallied around the hashtag Release the Snyder Cut, actually predated any confirmation that a genuine Snyder directed cut of the film even existed. Momentum for the movement grew steadily as reactions to the theatrical release remained divided, with many fans assuming correctly, as it turned out, that Whedon's changes had diminished the film compared to Snyder's original intentions. Commentators frequently drew a parallel tale to the situation surrounding Superman 2 from 1980, where director Richard Donner was eventually given the opportunity to complete and release his own version of that film decades later in 2006 as Superman 2, the Richard Donner Cut. Because several of Snyder's previous films, including Watchmen and Batman v Superman, had previously received extended home media cuts that were generally considered improvements over their theatrical counterparts. Many observers assumed some form of alternate Justice League cut was more or less inevitable. Numerous people connected to the original production voiced public support for releasing the Snyder cut, including cast members Ben Affleck, Gal Gadot, Jason Momoa, Sharon Hines, and Ray Fisher. Support also came from behind the scenes, including from photographer Clay Enos, storyboard artist Jay Oliva, cinematographer Fabian Wagner, and Affleck stunt double Richard Cetron. According to Deborah Snyder, executive producers Christopher Nolan and Emma Thomas actively encouraged the couple to pursue completing the Snyder Cut. On the second anniversary of the theatrical release, cast and crew used social media to reaffirm their support for the movement. The push for the Snyder Cut also drew backing from figures outside the immediate Justice League production, including filmmakers Kevin Smith and Alan Taylor, television producer Stephen S. D. Knight, and comic book writers Rob Liefeld, Robert Kirkman, and Jerry Ordway. Beyond simple social media posts, some fans engaged in more organized forms of activism to advocate for the cut's release, including directly reaching out to Warner Bros. Representative. The movement also took on a charitable dimension in the aftermath of Autumn Snyder's death and her father's departure from the production. Fans within the Release the Snyder Cut community organized fundraising campaigns for suicide prevention causes, which by February 2021 had collectively raised more than $500,000 for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Both Snyder and the foundation itself publicly praised these fundraising efforts. Ahead of San Diego Comic Con in 2019, fans launched a crowdfunding effort that split its proceeds between an advertising push, including physical billboards and a flying banner advertisement, and further donations to the Suicide Prevention Foundation. A similar campaign accompanied New York Comic Con later that same year when the movement purchased advertising space on two billboards overlooking Times Square, displaying quotes from cast and crew members. That December, another flying banner ad was purchased, this time flown directly over the Warner Brothers studio, lot appealing to then studio head and Sarnoff to greenlight the cut's release. The following January in 2020, the movement paid for 4 minutes of advertising space promoting the film's release on a digital display wrapped around the interior of Riverside Stadium during a broadcast of the FA Cup. Not everyone believed the movement carried real commercial weight. Sean Robbins, chief analyst at the industry publication Box Office Pro, suggested that the community pushing for the film's release was too small in scale to meaningfully affect the studio's decision making, expressing skepticism that interest in the project extended much beyond a core group of devoted fans. Writer Mario F. Robles, drawing on sources within the industry, reported that Warner Brothers simply did not trust Snyder's creative vision at the time and was unwilling to commit the necessary funds to finish the alternate cut. Throughout the years the movement was active, journalists frequently referred to the Snyder Cut using language that framed it as something almost legendary, describing it in various outlets as fabled or mythical, reflecting its uncertain and elusive status. The movement's reputation was not without controversy. Various journalists characterized elements of the fanbase as toxic, citing incidents of harassment, threats, and online bullying directed at individuals who expressed views critical of the push for the Snyder Cut. Johanna Desta, writing for Vanity Fair, situated this behavior within a broader pattern she saw emerging across modern fandoms, in which vocal segments of an audience increasingly demand changes to creative works through aggressive means. She drew a comparison to the harassment campaign that had targeted Star Wars, The Last Jedi actress Kelly Marie Tran. Brandon Katz of the New York Observer offered a more nuanced characterization, describing the movement as containing both a toxic contingent prone to hurling harassment at anyone who disagreed with them, and a separate group of genuinely supportive fans who simply appreciated Snyder's directorial style and hoped to see the trilogy he had envisioned since Man of Steel finally reached its conclusion. Academic observers offered some broader context for this dynamic. Bob Rehak, an associate professor and chair of film and media studies at Swarthmore College, noted that fan communities like Release the Snyder Cut often react intensely when a significant change is made to a piece of media they care deeply about, and that these strong, sometimes hostile reactions typically originate from a smaller, more vocal subsection of the larger fan community, a dynamic that risks unfairly characterizing the entire fan base based on the actions of a minority. A later investigative report from Rolling Stone, published in July 2022, revealed that internal research conducted by Warner Media had found that around 13% of the online activity associated with the Snyder Cut campaign was fraudulent, generated by internet bots rather than genuine fans. That same Rolling Stone investigation, which involved interviews with more than 20 individuals connected to both versions of the film, found that most of those sources believed Snyder had been actively working to manipulate and amplify the ongoing campaign behind the scenes. Separately, in September 2018, former DC Entertainment president Diane Nelson deleted her Twitter account entirely after facing substantial harassment from movement members. The volume of calls the studio's phone operators received specifically about the Snyder Cut eventually became so persistent that staff were trained to treat them functionally as prank calls. By March 2019, Snyder had confirmed publicly that a cut of Justice League bearing his creative vision did in fact exist, and that whether it would ever be released was ultimately a decision that rested with Warner Brothers. Later that year, in November, an unnamed industry insider dismissed the prospects of a release, describing the idea that Warner Brothers would actually put out Snyder's cut as a pipe dream. That same December, Snyder confirmed that his version of the film ran to approximately 214 minutes. Robert Greenblatt, who at the time chaired Warner Media and oversaw HBO Max, later revealed that internal discussions about actually releasing Snyder's version began in earnest in late 2019 and continued for a period of a few months. Greenblatt was careful to note that Snyder's cut was still unfinished at that stage and that the studio would need to both fund its completion and resolve outstanding issues with the relevant film industry unions before any release could move forward. Initially, the studio approached Snyder with the option of releasing his cut in its unfinished state, but Snyder rejected this, insisting that the film either be properly completed or not released at all, a position that left Warner Bros. To spend the following months weighing whether to commit to full completion. According to Snyder's own account, Warner Media ultimately decided to move forward with releasing the Snyder Cut in February 2020 after Chairman Toby Emmerich formally acknowledged the ongoing Release the Snyder Cut campaign and reached out to Snyder directly. To help finalize that decision, the Snyders invited a group of executives from Warner Bros., HBO Max, and DC to their home to view an early assembly of the film presented at that stage in black and white. During this meeting, Snyder floated several different ideas for how the completed cut could ultimately be released, including the possibility of an episodic rollout rather than a single feature length film. The executives came away impressed by what they saw and agreed to move forward with the project. From there, Snyder began working again with the same post production team that had originally been assembling the film before his departure. The undertaking was complicated by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which was escalating rapidly around this same period. But the Snyders were determined to see the project through to completion despite those obstacles. Snyder began informing members of the original cast about the revived project during April and May of 2020. He has said that Ray Fisher was the first cast member he contacted and that Fisher initially assumed Snyder was joking. On May 20, 2020, during a live Q&A session that followed an online watch party for Man of Steel, Snyder publicly announced that his version of Justice League would be released under the title Zack Snyder's Justice League on HBO Max sometime in 2021. Greenblatt later said that Warner Media had made a deliberate effort to get that announcement out as quickly as they could, aiming to do so before the official launch of HBO Max on May 27 of that year. Snyder described the project as something closer to an entirely new work rather than a simple restoration. noting that even those who had already seen the theatrical release would find his version to be a distinctly different experience. Both Snyders felt that being given the chance to finally finish the film as originally intended would provide them with a sense of closure, and they expressed genuine enthusiasm about the opportunity to significantly expand the depth of the characters' arcs. Greenblatt indicated that completing the project would prove extremely costly, initially estimating the cost at upward of $30 million. In June 2020, Sandra Dewey, Warner Media's president of productions and business operations, stated in an interview that the studio was targeting a release window somewhere between early and mid 2021. By January 2021, Snyder had finished his cut of the film. News of the official Zack Snyder's Justice League announcement was met with celebration from the Release the Snyder Cut community, with a wave of enthusiastic reactions spreading across social media. Some especially devoted fans even filmed themselves physically destroying their DVD and Blu ray copies of the original theatrical cut as a symbolic gesture. Many people connected to the production, including cast members, publicly thanked the fans whose sustained advocacy had helped make the release possible. At the same time, a number of journalists raised concerns that Warner Media's decision effectively rewarded a campaign that had, at various points, involved harassment and trolling, worrying that this could establish a troubling precedent for how studios respond to aggressive fan pressure going forward. Screen Rant specifically noted that the outcome risked sending the message that similarly forceful tactics could successfully influence decisions made by film studios, television networks, and streaming platforms. Addressing this criticism directly, HBO Max CEO Tony Goncalves acknowledged the passion driving the fan community while pushing back on the notion that harassment had driven the decision, framing the studio's choice instead as a standard business response to clear and sustained consumer demand. Filming, although early reports following the announcement suggested that no new footage would be shot for the completed version, that changed by September 2020 when it was revealed that Snyder was preparing to shoot additional new material with both Ben Affleck and Ray Fisher set to return to reprise their roles. This expansion of scope pushed the project's estimated budget up to around $70 million. Principal photography on this new footage began on October 6, 2020. Later that same month, several other actors from earlier DCEU films rejoined the production to reprise their previous roles. Amber Heard returned as Mera, Jared Leto returned as the Joker, and Joe Manganiello returned as Deathstroke. Snyder additionally directed a new scene featuring Ezra Miller as the Flash remotely, conducting the session over Zoom since Miller was in London at the time filming Fantastic Beasts: The Secrets of Dumbledore. To communicate his vision for the scene, despite not being physically present, Snyder sent the production crew detailed drawings and diagrams illustrating exactly how he wanted the sequence to look and feel. During filming, his video feed was displayed on a stand set up on the set, which allowed him to direct both Miller and the on set crew in real time, even from a remote location. Snyder has estimated that only around 4 to 5 minutes of usable footage ultimately came out of that particular remote shoot. Amber Heard confirmed that all of the reshoot work for the production had wrapped by December 2020. The film's climactic final scene went through an especially complicated production history. It was originally filmed with actor Wayne T. Carr portraying Jon Stewart in the role of Green Lantern, but Warner Brothers ultimately rejected this version of the scene because the studio had separate plans in mind for how that character would be introduced elsewhere. Over the course of development, the scene existed in several different configurations. One version paired the character Kilowog with Jon Stewart, another paired Kilowog with the alien Green Lantern Tomar Ray, and yet another paired Stewart with the Martian Manhunter. Snyder ultimately chose to replace Kilowog with the Martian Manhunter in the scene, while separately rejecting the Kilowog and Tomar Ray concept back during the original 2017 post-production period. In the end, Snyder settled on the version pairing Stewart with the Martian Manhunter and filmed that iteration of the scene in August 2020. However, because Warner Brothers remained opposed to including Stewart in the finished scene, Snyder ultimately agreed to a compromise with the studio, reshooting the sequence in October 2020 so that it would feature only the Martian Manhunter. As part of that same round of reshoots, he also had to redo Ben Affleck's portion of the scene, since the earlier footage of Affleck was rendered unusable due to problems with the lighting. At one point earlier in the process, Snyder had also considered bringing in Ryan Reynolds, who had previously played Hal Jordan in the 2011 Green Lantern film, to appear as an additional member of the Green Lantern Corps in order to help flesh out that group on screen, though he ultimately never reached out to Reynolds to pursue that idea. While the broad structural outline of the story stayed consistent with what audiences had seen in the theatrical version, numerous scenes that Joss Whedon had cut from his edit were restored in Snyder's version, substantially expanding the film's characterization, its broader mythology, and its world building elements. Snyder's cut also incorporates various setup material intended to tease future films that were planned as part of his larger vision for the franchise. Notably, none of the footage that Whedon had personally shot for the theatrical cut appears anywhere in Snyder's version. The two cuts share the same basic premise and characters, but draw from almost entirely separate pools of filmed material. Former Warner Bros. Executives John Berg and Jeff Johns, who had overseen production of Whedon's theatrical version, had their producing credits removed from Snyder's cut altogether. Snyder has stated publicly that his version of the film does not exist within the same narrative continuity as Whedon's theatrical cut, with Whedon's version remaining the officially canonical entry in the DC Extended Universe. That framing, however, has been complicated by comments from other people connected to the franchise. Jason Momoa, for instance, has said that the events of the 2018 Aquaman film take place following the events of Snyder's version specifically, rather than Whedon's. Patty Jenkins, who directed Wonder Woman, similarly stated that no director working within the DC franchise actually treats Whedon's Justice League as the canonical version of events, and confirmed that she had personally coordinated with Snyder to ensure that Wonder Woman remained consistent with the continuity established in his cut of Justice League. Despite these assurances of continuity, some commentators have pointed out inconsistencies between Aquaman and Zack Snyder's Justice League, particularly regarding details of Mera's backstory. Separately, the 2023 film The Flash does directly acknowledge events depicted in Zack Snyder's Justice League, further complicating the question of which version of events the wider franchise ultimately treats as canon. In the wake of the film's release, appreciative fans quickly organized around a new hashtag, His Restore the Snyderverse, advocating for Warner Brothers to give Snyder the opportunity to complete the full trilogy of films he had originally envisioned, starting with Man of Steel. A related but separate movement, Really See the Ayer Cut, emerged around the same time, calling on the studio to release director David Ayer's original vision for the 2016 film Suicide Squad. In July 2022, DC artist Jim Lee, who had originally helped Snyder develop the initial 5-film plan for the franchise, confirmed during a panel at San Diego Comic-Con that there were no plans in place for Snyder to direct any further DC projects, nor for the studio to develop any sequels building on his version of Justice League. Post-production. The post-production period for Zack Snyder's Justice League was defined by the enormous task of finishing visual effects work, sound design, and editing that had been left incomplete since Snyder's original departure from the project years earlier. Roughly $70 million in total was ultimately spent completing the visual effects, the musical score, and the overall editing process for the finished film, a figure that reflects both the scale of the unfinished work Snyder inherited and the addition of newly filmed material during the reshoot period in October 2020. The reassembled production team worked through the practical and logistical difficulties posed by the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic throughout this period, a challenge that added further complexity to an already demanding undertaking. Though the Snyders remained committed to completing it fully rather than releasing anything short of the version he had originally envisioned. As part of the post production process, the finished film was dedicated to the memory of Autumn Snyder, a gesture that reflected how closely intertwined the film's long and difficult journey to release had become with the personal tragedy the Snyder family experienced during the original 2017 production. The film's completed length at approximately 4 hours stood as a direct product of this extended post production effort, incorporating a far larger amount of Snyder's original footage than had ever made it into the theatrical cut. Alongside the newly filmed reshoot material and a newly composed musical score, music composer Tom Holkenborg, who works professionally under the name Junkie XL, was responsible for scoring Zack Snyder's Justice League. Holkenborg's involvement with the project actually dated back to the original theatrical production, for which he had likewise composed a score before he was replaced partway through post production by Danny Elfman following Snyder's departure and Whedon's arrival as director. When Holkenborg was brought back on board to score the finished director's cut in early 2020, he made the decision to start over from scratch rather than adapt his earlier work, composing an entirely new score written specifically for Snyder's version of the story. The resulting score is a massive undertaking in its own right, comprising 54 individual tracks and running to a total length of 3 hours and 54 minutes. That length is significant enough to surpass the previous record holder. The score for the 1959 film Ben-Hur by nearly a full hour, making Holkenborg's work for Zack Snyder's Justice League the longest musical score ever composed for a film. Describing his approach to the score, Holkenborg characterized it as shifting between being fully electronic at certain points and fully orchestral at others, while also weaving in elements drawn from rock and trap music. The complete soundtrack album was released through Water Tower Music on March 18, 2021, the same day the film itself debuted. Ahead of the film's release, two individual tracks from the score were issued as singles. The Crew at War Power was released on February 17, 2021, followed by Middle Mass on March 12, 2021. Beyond Holkenborg's original score, the film's soundtrack also incorporates a handful of pre existing songs that were licensed for use but were not included as part of the official soundtrack album release. The opening of the film features a traditional Icelandic folk song, Visur Vansenda Rosu, performed by Jóngos Galesson. Later scenes in the film make use of two songs by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Distant Sky and There is a Kingdom. In addition to these, a cover version of Leonard Cohen's classic song, Hallelujah, performed by Alison Crow, plays over the film's end credits, serving as a direct tribute to the memory of Autumn Snyder. Music also played a prominent role in the film's marketing campaign well before its release. The first official teaser trailer, unveiled during the DC Fandom event on August 20, 2020, was built around a remix of Leonard Cohen's original 1984 recording of Hallelujah. That teaser was considered one of the most anticipated moments of the entire fandom event and was very well received by both general audiences and critics who covered the reveal. In early November of that year, the teaser was briefly pulled from HBO Max's social media platforms because the rights to use the Hallelujah recording had temporarily lapsed. On November 17, marking the third anniversary of the original theatrical release, an updated version of the teaser, incorporating additional new footage, was uploaded, presented in black and white on Snyder's personal Vero account, and in full color on HBO Max's official social media channels. The trailer would later be delisted from YouTube a second time in July 2023, again due to a music licensing dispute. By that point, it had already accumulated more than 31 million views, making it the most viewed trailer in the history of what was by then rebranded as the Max streaming service, Rolliser, alongside the initial May 2020 announcement of Zack Snyder's Justice League. HBO released a set of promotional posters featuring each of the six primary members of the Justice League. Although the underlying poster designs had actually first been used during the original 2017 marketing campaign for the theatrical release, the new HBO Max versions were altered with a black and white filter and placed a much stronger visual emphasis on Snyder's name as director. Screen Rant's Chris Agar, observed that this stark, desaturated visual treatment stood in sharp contrast to the vibrant, colorful posters that had been used to promote the theatrical release back in 2017, characterizing the choice as a deliberate effort to visually distinguish the two different versions of the film from one another in the minds of audiences. According to a Rolling Stone report, overall expenditures tied to the film rose from roughly $73 million to more than $100 million once marketing costs were factored in, implying that Warner Brothers spent at least $27 million specifically on promoting the film's release. As part of the broader promotional rollout, Warner Bros. Also partnered with Wonderland Restaurants, a DC Comics themed restaurant based in London, to develop a tie-in meal kit product designed around the visual look of the film's mother boxes, alongside a selection of menu items inspired by individual characters from the film. On February 14, 2021, the first full official trailer for the film was released. In the lead up to that release, Snyder had already shared a number of smaller sneak peek clips on social media, including glimpses of the Batmobile and of Jared Leto's redesigned take on the Joker. Writing for Esquire, Abigail Covington noted that the new trailer built directly on those earlier previews, drawing particular attention to its action sequences, its depiction of Darkseid and Superman's black suit. Charles Holmes, writing for The Ringer, highlighted Leto's brief appearance as the Joker in the trailer, singling out one of his lines in particular, while noting that the trailer leaned even further into Snyder's signature visual style, though Holmes remained uncertain at that point whether the finished film would ultimately prove superior to the theatrical cut. A third and final trailer followed on March 14, with Rolling Stone's Daniel Krebs writing approvingly about how it captured many of the qualities that had made Snyder's version of the story feel so legendary to fans in the years before its release. 2 days after that final trailer dropped, DC published three separate variant covers tied to the film's release for the ongoing Justice League comic book series, Issued 59, written by Brian Michael Bendis, with art by David Marquez and colors by Tamra Bonvillain. The variant covers themselves were illustrated by Lee Bermejo, Liam Sharp, and Jim Lee. At the 2021 Warner Media Upfront presentation, the company publicly declared the film to be a hit original production for the Max platform. Priya Dogra, who served as president of Warner Media Entertainment Networks for Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia Pacific, went even further during a presentation focused on HBO Max's European rollout, describing the film as a global phenomenon. Theatrical Zack Snyder's Justice League was primarily conceived and marketed as a streaming release rather than a traditional theatrical film, debuting on HBO Max in the United States on March 18, 2021. At an earlier stage of planning, the film had actually been targeted for a September 5, 2021 release. Before that date was moved up considerably. Upon release, it was made available for streaming in 4K resolution with support for high dynamic range video in both the HDR10 and Dolby Vision formats, along with Dolby Atmos audio. One notable difference from the original theatrical version is the film's rating. While the 2017 theatrical cut had received a PG-13 rating, this significantly longer and more violent director's cut was instead rated R, specifically citing violence and some language as the reasons for the stricter classification. In an unusual mishap ahead of the planned release, HBO Max accidentally made the full film available to some subscribers roughly 10 days early, when those viewers were actually attempting to stream the unrelated film Tom and Jerry. A week after its initial release on HBO Max, an alternate black and white cut of the film, titled The Justice is Grey Edition, was also made available on the platform, and it later reached UK audiences via Sky Cinema on April 30. Beyond its initial US debut, the film reached international audiences through a wide range of platforms and services. It was made available via HBO Go in select Asian countries, through the binge streaming service in Australia, and through Crave in Canada. Various HBO branded services carried the film in select European countries. In France, it was distributed digitally through services including Amazon Prime Video and the iTunes Store. Russian and CS audiences could access it via Kinopoisk HD. In India, the film reached audiences through a combination of digital services, including Book My Show, Hangama Play, Tata Sky, and the iTunes Store. New Zealand viewers could watch it through Neon, Sky Go, and Sky Movies Premiere, while UK audiences accessed it via Now and Sky Cinema. The film later reached audiences across Latin America when HBO Max officially launched service in that region on June 29, 2021. Although the completed cut had originally been planned for release as a four-part limited series, in addition to a standard single film cut, Snyder announced via his Vero's social media account in January 2021 that the finished project would instead be released as a single unified feature rather than being broken into episodes. Warner Media later confirmed this decision in an official press release, formally describing Zack Snyder's Justice League as a full length original feature film produced for the Max platform. As with earlier aspects of the project, the finished film carries a dedication to the memory of Autumn Snyder. Snyder had also expressed a personal interest in eventually screening the film in IMAX theaters once pandemic related restrictions eased enough to allow for safe reopening. That ambition was eventually realized in a limited capacity. A black and white version of the film, presented under the title Justice is Grey Edition, received an exclusive theatrical release on July 19, 2022, screening in IMAX format at a small number of locations in New York City, Los Angeles, and Austin, Texas. Proceeds generated from these special screenings were donated to a charitable effort supporting the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. For this theatrical presentation, Snyder incorporated a 10-minute intermission into the film, timed to coincide with the scores the crew at War Power track. The theatrical presentation used an open matte 1.33 baud 1 aspect ratio alongside a separate IMAX 1.43 1 version. The film would later be screened theatrically in full color for the very first time on IMAX screens on April 30, 2023, as the concluding installment of a 3-day Snyderverse trilogy theatrical event, which was likewise organized as a fundraiser supporting suicide prevention efforts. Physical home media releases of Zack Snyder's Justice League rolled out across various international markets over the months following its streaming debut. In the United Kingdom, the film arrived on 4K Ultra HD, standard Blu-ray, and DVD on May  24, 2021. It followed shortly afterward in several other territories. Hong Kong received its release on May 25, Australia on May 26, and both Germany and Italy on May 27 of that year. A limited edition steelbook version was announced specifically for the UK market through retailer HMV, with pre-orders opening on March 22. Warner Brothers. UK later reported that these pre-order units for the home media release completely sold out within the first 20 minutes of going on sale. In the United States, the film reached Blu-ray, DVD, and 4K formats on September 7, with Canadian audiences gaining access to the same formats roughly a week later. A digital release of the film followed considerably later on July 19, 2022. Streaming viewership data collected in the days immediately following the film's release painted a picture of strong initial interest. The view tracking service Samba TV reported that approximately 8 million American households had streamed at least the opening 5 minutes of the film between March 19 and March 21, based on data drawn specifically from smart televisions rather than other connected devices. That figure fell short of the comparable 3-day total recorded for the DCEU's Wonder Woman 1984, which reached 2.2 million households over a similar window. Samba TV also found that only about one-third of viewing households actually watched the entire film in one uninterrupted sitting, a statistic that likely reflects the film's unusually long runtime. Looking at the film's first full week of availability, Samba TV reported that 2.2 million US households had watched it, with roughly 792,000 of those households, or about 36%, completing the film in a single sitting. Over that same initial week, downloads of the HBO Max app itself rose by 64% compared to a typical week, while the rate at which the app was opened climbed by 8.9%. Extending the data further out, Samba TV later reported that the film had reached 3.2 million households after its first 17 days of availability, and 3.7 million US households after a total of 39 days. The film's performance extended well beyond the United States. In Canada, it became the most streamed piece of content in the history of the Crave streaming service, drawing 1.1 million viewers within a single week of release, and some reports credited the film's popularity with contributing to a subsequent 12% increase in the service's overall subscriber base. In the United Kingdom, where the film streamed via Sky Cinema, it was viewed by roughly 954,000 households, of which 458,000, or about 48%, watched the film in full. In India, where the film became available through Book My Show stream, approximately 100 Zero Zone households tuned in over its opening weekend, and the film went on to become the single most rented title of the entire year on that platform. In Spain, it ranked as the third most viewed release of 2021 on HBO Max España. In Germany, the film topped the weekly rankings on Netflix during its first full week of availability there and remained within the platform's weekly top 10 most viewed films list for a total of 7 weeks. Broader industry tracking data further underscored the film's reach. According to Whip Media, a company that monitors viewership habits for the 19 million worldwide users of its TV Time app, Zack Snyder's Justice League ranked as the eighth most streamed film across all of 2021. Separately, in January 2022, the technology firm Akamai reported that the film had also become the second most pirated film of that same year, a somewhat unusual distinction that speaks to both its popularity and the unconventional circumstances of its streaming first release. Variety later cited data placing the film as the fourth most streamed film overall for the year 2021. On the retail and sales side of home media performance, the film debuted at the top of the NPD Video Scan First Alert chart, which tracks overall home media sales performance in the United States during its opening week, and it likewise led the more specific Blu-ray sales chart during that same period. Its opening week performance was strong enough that it outsold the second place title, The Conjuring. The Devil Made Me Do It by a factor of 5. In a related data point, the complete trilogy of DCEU films, directed by Snyder, collectively ranked 14th on the broader Blu-ray sales chart around this same period. According to sales figures compiled by The Numbers, the film sold 107, 489 Blu-ray units, and 33,820 DVD units during its first week of availability, generating approximately $4.1 million in revenue from that opening stretch alone. By May 29, 2022, the numbers estimated that the film had accumulated roughly $15.96 million in total domestic video sales revenue, having sold a cumulative 439,547 Blu-ray copies and 92,599 DVD copies up to that point. By its second week on the market, the film had slipped to second place on the overall home media sales chart as well as the dedicated Blu-ray chart, having been overtaken by Black Widow, which reportedly outsold it by roughly 4 times during that particular week. The numbers reported that the film moved 71,682 units in total during that second week, generating around $2 million in additional revenue. By the end of September, NPD data placed the film in third position on the overall disc sales rankings. Its chart position later dipped further, falling to 29th place in overall disc sales and 24th place specifically in Blu-ray sales by its 9th week of availability, before rebounding sharply the following week, when it climbed back into the top 10 and reclaimed the second place position overall amid a wave of discounted pricing tied to Black Friday shopping promotions, during which it also led all titles specifically in Blu-ray unit sales. The numbers reported that the film sold 51,027 Blu-ray units that week alone, generating approximately $1.4 million in revenue. In the United Kingdom, the film topped the official film chart for a total of 5 consecutive weeks, and it finished the year as the second highest selling Blu-ray title of 2021 in that country, having sold nearly 26 Zero Zone units domestically over the course of the year. Reception box office. Because Zack Snyder's Justice League was conceived and marketed from the outset as a direct-to-streaming release rather than a traditional theatrical film, it did not generate box office receipts in the conventional sense, during its primary release window on HBO Max. Its commercial performance is instead measured almost entirely through streaming viewership statistics, digital and physical home media sales figures, and various platform specific viewership rankings, all of which point to a release that performs strongly across a wide range of international markets, even if that success does not translate into a traditional theatrical box office. Gross, the film's limited theatrical exposure came much later and in a considerably different form. Through the black and white Justice is Grey Edition screenings held in select IMAX theaters in mid 2022 and again in 2023, both of which were structured explicitly as charitable fundraising events supporting suicide prevention causes rather than conventional commercial theatrical engagements aimed at generating box office revenue. By contrast, the original 2017 theatrical version of Justice League, released under Joss Whedon's guidance following Snyder's departure, followed a much more conventional box office trajectory, and its underperformance relative to expectations played a significant role in shaping the broader direction the DC Extended Universe would take in the years that followed. That version grossed approximately $657, 9 million worldwide against an estimated production budget of around $300 million. When that box office figure is measured against estimates of the film's break-even point, which some analysts place as high as $750 million, once marketing, distribution, and other associated costs were factored in, the film is generally regarded as having posted a financial loss for Warner Bros., with Deadline, Hollywood specifically estimating the shortfall at around $60 million. That commercial disappointment, layered on top of the film's mixed to negative critical reception, directly contributed to Warner Bros. S subsequent decision to move away from Snyder's original vision of a tightly interconnected shared cinematic universe, shifting the studio's focus instead towards standalone films built around individual DC characters. Critical response on the review aggregation website Rotten Tomatoes, Zack Snyder's Justice League holds a 71% positive rating based on 314 reviews, with an average score of 6.7 out of 10. The site's critical consensus describes the film as living up to its title by delivering a sprawling cut that expands to accommodate the director's full creative vision, suggesting it should ultimately satisfy the community of fans whose sustained advocacy helped bring it into existence. On Metacritic, which aggregates critic reviews using a weighted scoring system, the film received a score of 54 out of 100 based on 46 individual critics, a result the site classifies as falling into the range of mixed or average reviews. Notably, both of these aggregate scores represent a clear improvement over the scores the original 2017 theatrical version received, which stood at 39% on Rotten Tomatoes and 45 on Metacritic, respectively. According to a critical roundup compiled by The Hollywood Reporter, critics broadly praised Snyder's directorial choices and the film's deeper characterization work, while still voicing consistent criticism of the film's considerable length. A separate roundup published by Variety found that the majority of critics who reviewed the film considered it a clear improvement over the 2017 theatrical version, a conclusion that was echoed in the assessments compiled by both The Hollywood Reporter and The Wrap. Total Film, however, offered a somewhat different take, characterizing the overall critical response as more genuinely mixed, noting that critics were divided on the more fundamental question of whether Snyder's cut was actually superior to the theatrical version at all. Rob Harvilla, writing for The Ringer, offered a right take on the situation, suggesting that the film had become the rare Zack Snyder film that critics seemed to generally enjoy or at least grudgingly appreciate. And he further argued that both fans and critics alike seem to hold a certain respect for the film simply due to the remarkable and unusual circumstances surrounding its existence. Individual reviews varied considerably in their overall assessments, though a substantial number of critics responded positively. Robbie Collin of the Daily Telegraph awarded the film a full 5-star rating, praising Hulkenborg's musical score, the film's action sequences, and its characterization work, all of which he considered superior to what audiences had seen in the original theatrical cut. Colin further argued that Snyder's overall creative vision for the DC Extended Universe came across as genuinely distinctive within the broader landscape of contemporary superhero filmmaking. Jenna Anderson of Comic Book Com rated the film 4.5 out of 5, similarly praising its expanded characterization, the performances of its cast, and Snyder's directorial technique, and expressed a belief that Snyder had made the film out of love, both for his late daughter and for the fans who had campaigned so persistently for its release. She described the finished result as a well executed and entertaining exploration of the power of human connection and inspiration, calling it a story that felt both timeless in its themes and distinctly timely in the moment of its release. Writing for Variety, Owen Gleiberman offered a strongly positive assessment of Snyder's direction, describing it as conveying a genuinely majestic sense of cosmic historical evil. And he drew a comparison between the film's scope and ambition and Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy, while also singling out the film's visual effects, work, and character development for particular praise. Gleiberman, together with fellow Variety critic Peter DeBruge, later included the film on their list of the 8 best films of 2021. Matt Zoller Seeds of RogerEbert.com gave the film 3.5 out of 4 stars, arguing that it was clearly superior to the theatrical version and describing Snyder's overall approach as a bold example of distinctly auteurist filmmaking. While Seeds acknowledged that a number of individual scenes felt overly drawn out, he also felt that this extended pacing served a purpose, allowing the film room to deepen its characterization and to establish a genuine sense of space and physical place within its world. Tom Jorgensen of IGN rated the film 8 out of 10, describing it as a genuine vindication of Snyder's original creative vision. Echoing sentiments similar to those expressed by Seitz, Jorgensen argued that the significantly longer runtime allowed for meaningfully deeper development of both the film's characters and its broader mythology, noting that nearly every character in the film, from the most prominent heroes down to more minor figures, benefited from a clearer emotional journey and a greater overall sense of depth compared to the theatrical cut. Mick LaSalle, reviewing for the San Francisco Chronicle, likewise offered a positive assessment, agreeing that the extended runtime meaningfully strengthened the film's characterization and reiterating his view that the director's cut was superior to the original theatrical release. LaSalle ultimately concluded that while the film might not necessarily qualify as an outright great work of cinema, it nonetheless carried the sense of madness, strangeness, and deeply personal obsessiveness that he associated with a genuine work of art. Other critics offered more mixed assessments. Bilge Ebiri, writing for Vulture, described the film as containing both the very best and the very worst tendencies found across Snyder's body of work, framing it as an unmistakably personal project for the director. Eberi's take on the character of Cyborg was itself somewhat divided. He felt that the character's emotional beats were rendered in fairly broad and basic strokes, yet he simultaneously considered Cyborg's material to represent some of the strongest content in the entire film. Ebiri reserved his sharpest criticism for the film's action sequences, which he felt leaned too heavily on computer generated visual effects and exaggerated use of slow motion rather than more grounded practical effects work. And he was similarly critical of the film's central story, which he described as the least interesting element of the overall project. A number of critics responded to the film considerably more negatively. John DeFore of The Hollywood Reporter gave the film an unfavorable review overall. While he acknowledged that the plot, tone, and visual effects work all represented improvements over the theatrical cut, he was sharply critical of both the film's runtime and its dialogue, characterizing much of the film as maintaining an unrelentingly heavy, humorless tone from its very first chapter onward. Richard Brody, writing for The New Yorker, was similarly unimpressed by the film's length, arguing that individual scenes had been trimmed down to little more than their bare informational essentials, leaving no meaningful space for genuine thought or emotional resonance to develop. Brody was also critical of the film's visual effects and its approach to characterization, arguing that the film ultimately trivialized, manipulated, and distorted what should have been sincere and serious emotional stakes for its central cast of heroes. Richard Trenholm of CNET offered a more mixed take, praising the performances delivered by the cast while still describing the overall film as bloated, citing what he saw as numerous redundant scenes and an overly serious tone throughout. Siddhant Adlakha, reviewing for the New York Observer, gave the film a notably low rating of 1.5 out of 4 stars, arguing that whatever improvements the director's cut brought to the table were simply insufficient to correct what he considered a fundamentally flawed project from its earliest conception. The BBC's Mark Kermode was similarly unenthusiastic, describing the film as turgid and bloated, and further characterizing the director's cut as uniformly boring in a way that felt distinct from the more fractured, disjointed sense of boredom he associated with the original theatrical version. Hannah Strong of Little White Lies rated the film 2 out of 5, concluding that it was overlong and miserable, and arguing that its existence ultimately signified little beyond demonstrating the potential for fan campaigns to directly influence high level creative decisions at major studios. Despite this range of critical opinion, the film left a lasting impression within broader pop culture and awards adjacent conversations well after its initial release window had passed. In February 2022, it was named one of 5 finalists for the newly introduced Oscars Cheer Moment Twitter sweepstakes, organized as part of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences broader Oscars fan favorite initiative. Among the finalists, a specific sequence from the film The Flash Enters the Speed Force ultimately finished in first place in the public voting, underscoring the degree to which particular moments from Snyder's version of the story had resonated strongly with dedicated segments of the film's audience even a full year after its original release.